The dead, El Muerto. After getting the lay of the land, so to speak, frontierman Bigfoot Wallace moved from Austin to San Antonio, which was considered the extreme edge of the frontier, to sign up as a Texas Ranger under Jack Hayes. In them days, Texas was as wild as the West could get. There was danger from the south from the Mexicans, danger to the wet and north from the wild frontier filled with Indians and desperados, and to the east the settlement still had problems with the Cherokee Nation. General Sam Houston himself had appointed young Captain Hayes, a hero from the Battle of Plum Creek, to raise a company of Rangers to defend San Antonio. Hayes had high standards for his men. They were the best fighters in the West, and they had to be, considering the fact that they were often outnumbered 50-1. A man had to have courage, good character, good riding and shooting skills, and a horse worth $100 to be considered for the job. Captain Hayes knew all about Bigfoot Wallace and signed him on the spot. So armed with Colt pistol and a Bowie knife, Texas Ranger Bigfoot Wallace once more took on the Wild West and quickly made his mark on Texas folklore. In them days, the Rangers tended to handle stock theft at the end of the rope, so to speak, stringing up the bandits, forcing a confession out of them, and then leaving the bodies swaying in the wind to deter other outlaws. Only it didn't work, and the bandits kept right on stealing, sometimes passing right under the bodies of their fellow outlaws to do it. Now Bigfoot's fellow ranger, Creed Taylor, had a big spread laid west of San Antonio, in the Cedar Hills clear on the edge of Comanche territory, and he was constantly losing stock to bandits and Indian raids. The last straw came for Taylor the day famous Mexican raider and cattle thief Vidal and his gang rounded up a bunch of horses from his ranch and took them south toward Mexico. Most of the Rangers were heading north to pursue some Comanches out on a raid, but Taylor and a friend went immediately in pursuit of the thief, and when they bumped into Wallace just below Uvalde, he joined them. Bigfoot was always ready to hunt horse thieves and desperados, especially those of Mexican descent, never forgetting what happened to his brother at Goliad. Bigfoot decided it was time to put an end to Vidal's gang once and for all. He would track the wiry Mexican bandit to earth. The three men located the camp where the horse thief and his gang lay sleeping and snuck in from downwind so as not to alert the horses. Vidal was wanted dead or alive, so all the thieves were shot and killed in the gunfight that followed. That was when Wallace got an idea. Obviously, hanging horse thieves hadn't gotten the message across to the outlaws raiding the ranches of the good folk of Texas. Perhaps a more drastic example of frontier justice would do the trick. Severing Vidal's head from his body, Bigfoot and his fellow ranger tied the body to the saddle of the wildest Mustang in the stolen herd and secured the severed head to the saddle horn so that it would bounce and flop around with every step taken by the Mustang. Then Wallace gave a shout and sent the horse running away with its headless, dead rider, hoping the gruesome sight would deter future cattle thieves. What he managed to do was frighten everyone in South Texas. Folks would be peacefully walking down the road of an evening when a terrible headless rider would gallop past on a midnight black stallion with serape blowing in the wind and severed head bounding on the saddle horn beneath its sombrero. Nothing could deter the terrible specter, not bullets, not arrows, not spears. It was years before a posse of cowboys finally grew brave enough to bushwhack the horse and release the withered corpse from its back. But on moonless nights, the ghost of El Muerto continues to ride across South Texas to this day with his long black serape blowing in the wind and his severed head bumping on the saddle beside him. Enchanted. I roam alone in the woods, listening to the enchanted children's voices calling to me. Little girl, come and play, they sing over and over in my ears. Sometimes I hear them from the window of my room. They giggle and whisper words that I cannot make out. They sound like so much fun that I run outside my house as fast as I can to try to catch them. I plunge into the woods, calling back to the children, but no one answers. So I stand still as a mouse, trying to hear where they are hiding. I find it odd that no one else can hear the children. I tell my mother about the game of hide and seek that they play with me, but I know she doesn't believe me. She just ruffles my hair and chuckles about my bright imagination. Papa can't hear them because he is too busy reading the paper and going to work. He says I will grow up to be a writer. One morning, I hear the enchanted children calling to me from my porch. "Sarah, come out and play." I finish my breakfast so fast that the milk spills from my cereal bowl and run outside with my blue smock still dripping wet. "Where are you?" I call as I run into the woods. I can hear them giggling and footsteps scampering first here, then there. I laugh aloud and follow them uphill and then down. Only my foot slips in the damp leaves and I slide too fast, too fast. I fall backward, windmilling my arms. Then a terrible pain shoots through my head and it strikes against a rock. I see a blinding light and then nothing. I hear my name called from very far away, "Sarah, Sarah." I open my eyes and sit up, rubbing my hair. Something isn't right, but I cannot tell at first what it is. Then I look at my hand and realize I can see the ground right through it. That's strange, I think, standing up and brushing dead leaves from my blue smock. I look around to see who is calling my name, but I see no one in the woods with me. I notice that the trees look taller than I remember them and the pathway is overgrown with weeds. I make my way home slowly, hoping Mother can explain to me why I can see through my hands, why the trees are so tall. But someone else is staying at my house. Mother and Papa must have gone away on vacation. I climb up into my favorite tree to wait for their return. After a few minutes, a lady comes outside and calls up to me. She is dressed strangely in a man's long pants and a rough work shirt. I feel shy, so I pretend to be invisible. I see the lady blink a few times and rub at her eyes, as if she can no longer see me. She goes back into the house, muttering to herself, and pours herself a cup of water. Then I hear the enchanted children calling out to me again from the woods. I slid out of the branches of the tree and run to answer them. At least they haven't changed. I can see the children clearly now, as they play hide and seek in the woods. I join their games, laughing sometimes when one of the boys tweaks me on the ear or when one of the girls compliments me on my dress and blue smock. This is fun. But sometimes the enchanted children go away to another place, a place I can't follow. When they vanish, I wander back to my house, wondering when Mother and Papa will come home. Or I play in the alley by the woods, but I don't like it when strangers try to talk to me. One day when the children go away, I follow my nose to the door of a pretty lady who is baking cookies. I peek into the kitchen window and smile at her. How I want one of those cookies. The lady looks out the window and sees me. She smiles and then comes to the front door. I know she is going to offer me a cookie, so I scamper to the door and wait eagerly for it to open. When it does, I grin at the pretty lady, but she looks right through me, a puzzled frown on her face. Maybe she is blind, I think, and so I say politely, "May I come in?" right into her ear. The lady gives a start, backs hastily inside the house, and shuts the door in my face. No cookies for me then. I sigh and go back into the woods to wait for the enchanted children. When the children come to the woods, I am happy again and we play for days and days. We sing and we dance and the boys play tricks and we climb all the trees and fall out of them. But they only come during the day. The nights are lonely and sometimes I wait for hours and hours during the day before they come. I like to go to the pretty lady's house and sit on the half wall while I wait. Maybe one day she will offer me a cookie. The lady's grown-up daughter passes me sometimes on her way in and out of the house. Once the daughter asked me where I lived, but I was too shy to speak to her. The daughter put some pretty metal cats near the wall where I like to sit. I play with them when I feel lonely and no one else is around. It is beautiful here in the woods, and I like playing with the enchanted children. But often I wish Mother and Papa would come home. I miss them so much. But they never do. Express train from hell. For days, a ragged old man had hung around the Newark Central Station. The station master kept writing him off, but night after night he would return. He kept accosting people, shouting, "It's coming for me. It's coming." Whenever anyone asked him what was coming for him, he would just clutch his head and cry, "I done wrong. I killed a man that cheated me at cards, and now I'm going to pay." The station master finally took the man aside and threatened to call the police if he did not cease and desist. The old man rolled his eyes and replied, "The express train for hell is coming for my soul. You've got to help me." He broke away from the station master and ran for the door. The time was 2 minutes to midnight. At that moment, new sound introduced itself. A long whistle blew once, twice. The station master was startled. The next train wasn't due until 12:05. The old tramp started screaming when he heard the whistle. The station master could hear the roar and chug of a steam train approaching fast. Approaching too fast to stop at the station. The old man was standing at the edge of the platform, staring down the tracks in frozen terror. The station master ran forward and grabbed hold of the old tramp to pull him out of harm's way. The train whistle sounded again. A warm rush of air blew against everyone near the platform, and the station master heard the roar of an invisible train passing directly in front of him. He heard the hiss of the steam and the screech of flanges against iron rails. He felt the wind whipping our hair and faces, but he saw nothing. Beneath his grip, the old tramp gave a terrible wail. Then he vanished, leaving the station master empty-handed. The roar of the invisible train faded into the distance and then ceased. The station master glanced at the station clock. It was midnight. The station master stared blankly at the tracks. Around him, the waiting passengers and other bystanders were gasping and murmuring in fright. "Good Lord, he was right," the station master murmured to himself. It did come for him. He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his sweating, bald head with it. A trembling man standing nearby approached the station master. "Sir, what was that?" he asked. "Son, I believe that was the express train to hell," said the station master. He shook his head, and that seemed to bring him to his senses. "Why don't you go back into the station and pour yourself a drink?" he suggested to the trembling man. He pushed the man through the station door and then turned to address the dazed and frightened passengers. "Nothing to worry about, folks," he said. "It was just an express train passing through. The next train will be here in 5 minutes." The station master's reassuring manner calmed everyone. People turned away from the empty tracks and settled back into their seats, whispering to each other about the strange events that had just taken place. Then the station master went into his office, closed the door, and poured himself a stiff drink to calm his nerves. "Well, that's one for the books," he muttered aloud. "I wonder if I should put it on the schedule, 12 a.m. express train to hell." Shaking his head, he fortified himself with one more brandy and then went back to work. 50-cent piece. There is a story told in Troy and Albany about a couple returning home from a trip to New England. They were driving home in a carriage and were somewhere near Spiegeltown when the light failed, and they knew they would have to seek shelter for the night. The husband spied a light through the trees and turned their horse into a small lane leading up a hill. A pleasant little house stood at the crest, and an old man and his wife met the couple at the door. They were in nightclothes and were obviously about to turn in, but they welcomed the travelers and offered them a room. The old woman bustled about making tea and offering freshly baked cakes. Then the travelers were shown to their room. The husband wanted to pay the old couple for their lodgings, but the old lady shook her head, and the old man refused any payment for such a small service to their fellow New Yorkers. The travelers awoke early and tiptoed out of the house, leaving a shiny 50-cent coin in the center of the kitchen table where the old couple could not miss it. The husband hitched up the horse, and they went a few miles before they broke their fast at a little restaurant in Spiegeltown. The husband mentioned the nice old couple to the owner of the restaurant, and the man turned pale. "Where did you say that house was?" he asked. The husband described the location in detail. "You must be mistaken," said the restaurant owner. "That house was destroyed 3 years ago by a fire that killed the Brown family." "I don't believe it," the husband said flatly. "Mr. and Mrs. Brown were alive and well last night." After debating for a few more minutes, the couple and the restaurant owner drove the carriage back out of town towards the old Brown place. They turned into the lane, which was overgrown with weeds, and climbed the hill to the crest. There they found a burned-out shell of a house that had obviously not sheltered anyone for a long time. "I must have missed the track," said the husband. And then his wife gave a terrified scream and fainted into his arms. As he caught her, the husband looked into the ruin and saw a burnt table with a shiny 50-cent piece lying in the center. First day of school. She was brand new history teacher to the school and had been preparing her first lesson in her mind for weeks. This was her very first teaching job, and she wanted it to go well. The night before classes began, she couldn't eat and tossed and turned restlessly all night. Up early, she was in her new classroom, sweeping the floor, tidying the desks, and putting up welcome signs just after dawn. Finally, the first bell rang and her very first class came rushing in through the door. They were eager and lively and full of high spirits. She felt her heart lift at the sight of their fresh faces, and soon a lively dialogue between teacher and new students was established. They liked her, she could tell. And they were smart too. She tossed review questions lightly at them to see how much information they've retained from the previous grade, and they were prompt to answer. And most of the answers were correct. One particular lad, sitting in one of the front desks, was particularly knowledgeable about history. She was impressed by his answers, and more impressed by the fact that he did not push himself forward as the class know-it-all. He answered quickly and quietly, and let others take their turns. He had bright blue eyes and curly dark hair, and his smile was impish. He smiled a lot, soaking in information like a sponge. The teacher smiled at him and tossed out another history question, seemingly at random, which he answered promptly after a pause indicated no one else knew how to respond. At that moment, the bell rang. The teacher smiled as she heard it. Her very first class of her very first day as a teacher had been a success. Then, to her surprise, the curly-haired boy in the front row got up promptly from his seat and hurried toward the door of the classroom without waiting for her to dismiss the class. That seemed strange after his polite behavior during the class. She opened her mouth to reprimand him and then gasped as he walked straight through the wall beside the door and vanished. The teacher felt her eyes widen and her mouth go dry in shock. Around her, the living students exclaimed in shock and fear. "Did you see?" shrieked one of the girls. "Did you see?" He went right through the wall. "A ghost!" He was a ghost, the boy sitting next to the ghost shouted, banging the desk in his agitation. There was pandemonium in the room for about 5 minutes while the students from the first class exclaimed in excitement and fear while the students filing in for the next class tried to figure out what was going on. The teacher sat on the edge of her desk feeling faint and dizzy. It wasn't until a student brought her a drink of water that she recovered herself enough to dismiss the first class and welcome in the second. The new teacher found out over lunch with her colleagues that the school building had the reputation for being haunted by the ghosts of students who had died too young. Footsteps were heard after hours. Janitors reported the sounds of children talking and laughing inside darkened classrooms, and sometimes felt invisible presences rushing down the empty hallways. But she was the first teacher to see a ghost student in her classroom. The new teacher exited the school after her first day in a thoughtful mood. So, this was teaching. Eager students, belligerent students, funny students, and one ghost. "I wonder what day 2 will bring," she asked aloud, and then shrugged and went home to dinner. Ghost handprints. My wife Jill and I were driving home from a friend's party late one evening in early May. It was a beautiful night with a full moon. We were laughing and discussing the party when the engine started to cough and the emergency light went on. We had just reached the railroad crossing where Villamain Road becomes Shane Road. According to local legend, this was the place where a school bus full of children had stalled on the tracks. Everyone on board the bus had been killed by an oncoming freight train. The ghosts of the children were reported to haunt this intersection and were said to protect people from danger. Not wanting a repeat of the train crash, I hit the gas pedal, trying to get our car safely across the tracks before it broke down completely. But the dad-blamed car wouldn't cooperate. It stalled dead center on the railroad tracks. As if that weren't enough, the railroad signals started flashing and a bright light appeared a little ways down the track, bearing down fast on our car. I turned the key and hit the gas pedal, trying to get the car started. "Hurry up, Jim. The train's coming," my wife urged, as if I didn't hear the whistling blowing a warning. I broke out into a sweat and tried the engine again. Nothing. "We have to get out," I shouted to my wife, reaching for the door handle. "I can't," Jill shouted desperately. She was struggling with her seat belt. We'd been having trouble with it recently. She'd been stuck more than once, and I had to help her get it undone. I threw myself across the stick shift and fought with the recalcitrant seatbelt. My hands were shaking and sweat poured down my body as I felt the rumble of the approaching train. It had seen us and was whistling sharply. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. The engineer was trying to slow down, but he was too close to stop before he hit us. I redoubled my efforts. Suddenly, the car was given a sharp shove from behind. Jill and I both gasped and I fell into her lap as the car started to roll forward, slowly at first, then gaining speed. The back end cleared the tracks just a second before the train roared past. As the car rolled to a stop on the far side of the tracks, the engineer stuck his head out the window of the engine and waved a fist at us, doubtless shouting something nasty at us for scaring him. "TH. That was close," Jill gasped as I struggled upright. "How did you get the car moving?" "I didn't," I said. "Someone must have helped us." I jumped out of the door on the driver's side of the car and ran back to the tracks to thank our rescuer. In the bright moonlight, I searched the area, looking for the person who had pushed our car out of the path of the train. There was no one there. I called out several times, but no one answered. After a few minutes' struggle with her seatbelt, Jill finally freed herself and joined me. "Where is he?" she asked. "There is no one here," I replied, puzzled. "Maybe he is just shy about being thanked," Jill said. She raised her voice. "Thank you, whoever you are," she called. The wind picked up a little, swirling around us, patting our hair and our shoulders like the soft touch of a child's hand. I shivered and hugged my wife tightly to me. We had almost died tonight, and I was grateful to be alive. "Yes, thank you," I repeated loudly to our mystery rescuer. As we turned back to our stalled vehicle, I pulled out my cell phone, ready to call for a tow truck. Beside me, Jill stopped suddenly, staring at the back of our car. "Jim, look," she gasped. I stared at our vehicle. Scattered in several places across the back of our car were several glowing handprints. They were small handprints, the kind that adorned the walls of elementary schools all over the country. I started shaking as I realized the truth. Our car had been pushed off the tracks by the ghosts of the schoolchildren killed at this location. Tay wind swept around us again, and I thought I heard an echo of childish voices whispering your welcome as it patted our shoulders and arms. Then the wind died down and the handprints faded from the back of the car. Jill and I clung together for a moment in terror and delight. Finally, I released her and she got into the car while I called the local garage to come and give us a tow home.